Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring HFY. Humanity, fuck yeah! Volume 1. Prisoner of War by Randall Garrett. Combatman by John Massie Davis. Invader from Infinity by George Whittington. Out of the Dark Nebula by Milton L. Coe. Dead World by Jack Douglas. Humanity, fuck yeah! Prisoner of War by Randall Garrett. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, June 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. It was the first time a Flesso had met an Earthman face to face, and the Flesso appeared puzzled as to why the Earthman showed no fear. Martin wasn't prepared for it when the alien tractor beam grabbed his little ship. He had been in the 4th quadrant of Flesh territory, threading an uneasy course through the extraterrestrials' home grounds, but he hadn't expected to be caught so suddenly or so hard. The ship stopped in mid-flight abruptly, so abruptly that Martin's head was slammed back against the rear of the seat, and for a moment he was paralyzed by the shock of what had happened. But only for a moment. His toe reached out, snapped the pedal on the subspace radio, and an instant later the voice of Earth's central operator said, "What is it, Martin?" "Tell them I've been caught," Martin said crisply. "Tell them the Flesso patrols got me, and—" The radio went dead as the Flesso dampers got to it. Martin pulled himself forward and ran his eyes over the instrument panel. Again, the dark velvet of space, a dull grey Flesso warship was swelling in the viewplate, preparing to scoop up its prey. Martin had been caught like a fly in molasses. The odds had been against his stunt anyway. Theoretically, such a small ship as the little scout he was piloting should have been able to get through the Flesso patrols easily. But in practice, the network of spy beams stretching through the entire quadrant were efficient and near-infallible defenses, as Martin was discovering now. But I had lousy luck too, he thought. I wandered right up to the biggest warship in the whole damned fleet. Must have come within a light week or less. There wasn't much point in trying to break away now. Martin was trapped, thoroughly and unarguably. The little scout ship didn't carry 1/10 the power he would need to break from the grasp of the big battle cruiser. And as for the scout ship's armament, it wasn't enough even to tickle the screens of a battleship like this one. Scout ships depended on speed and indetectability, and neither attribute was of much value now. Within minutes, the heavy tractor beams pulled the smaller ship into the yawning airlock of the huge Flesso cruiser. Okay, Martin thought. He folded his arms, leaned back in his chair, and waited. There was nothing else he could do, until a Flesh tried to enter the ship. Time passed. The little scout ship was drawn further and further into the monster Flesso ship. It was now entirely enclosed by darkness, imprisoned within the metal hull of the huge battleship of space. Sitting inside, Martin waited patiently. The Flesso had been wanting to capture an Earthman for a long time. Well, now they'd succeeded. They'd captured their first Earth ship. Suddenly, Martin's dampened communicator screen came back to life. A scaly, toad-like face appeared, and Martin stared blandly at the 3 red-rimmed fiery eyes that confronted him. "I see you are still alive, Earthman." "No thanks to you, ugly face," Martin returned. "I'm hungry, though. Am I going to stay for dinner, or can I leave now?" Earth and Flesh had long been in communication with each other. The war had lasted for nearly 5 years, ever since the first treacherous Flesso sneak attack on a Terran outpost. The beings from the planet Flesh were the coldest, most dangerous aliens Earth had yet encountered in its expansion to the stars. During the war, neither side had succeeded in capturing one of the other's men alive. The ravening energies of a billion-cycle space gun tore a ship completely apart, leaving no survivors. But now Martin had been captured, and he was determined to make the most of it. "Keep your tongue," the toad-faced flesh snarled. "Do you know who I am?" "Santa Claus, Uncle Sam, the Wicked Witch of the North." The alien's face radiated hatred. "I am King Nathor." Martin whistled. Kuvek, eh? He had really stumbled into a good one then. Guvek was the leader of the Flesso legions. "Hello, Guvek. The pleasure is all mine. Do I have to keep looking at your face?" "You will surrender or die," Guvek said, ignoring the barb. Martin chuckled. "Okay, come and get me, ugly." He reached out and snapped off the communicator decisively. Without waiting to see what would happen next, he sprang from the control seat. The Flesso were going to expect to find him inside the little scout ship. Very well, Martin thought. That's the one place I won't be. Smiling grimly, he strapped on a pair of bulky Spaulding cutter pistols and headed for the escape hatch. The aliens, he knew, would be watching the main airlock. They wouldn't be expecting a second exit, and if they were, they wouldn't know exactly where it would be. Silently, Martin dropped through the hatch at the rear of the ship. "Come and get me," he thought. "I'm ready." He found himself in a large metal room that measured well over 100 feet in width and twice that in length. The ceiling, dimly seen, was far overhead beyond any quick estimation. Crouching in the shadow of his ship, Martin watched a platoon of the loathsome Flesso bring a heavy semi-portable burner up to the airlock. The reptilian aliens were having quite a time with the weapon. There was much hissing and flicking of tails as they got it in position. Finally, they managed to train the muzzle on the door, and then pressed the firing studs. A dazzling blue-white glare leapt toward the airlock door. Lovely, Martin thought, as the bright light cast fierce illumination in the giant room. An instant after the burner went into action, so did Martin. He drew his Spauldings and fired. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 quick, silent spurts of flame, and 4 of the aliens lay dead, charred through by the noiseless, almost invisible energy of the Spauldings. The unfortunate aliens had had no way of knowing where it had come from, that death that had hit 4 of their number in as many seconds. The burst of light from the semi-portable burner had blanketed every trace of the faint radiation from Martin's pistol. Huddling low, Martin ran for a nearby girder, taking advantage of the fact that the aliens' attentions were still directed toward the airlock of his ship. Naturally, they wouldn't notice a figure running from the rear. He took a position behind the girder and, aiming carefully, picked off 4 more of the aliens. He tried to put his shot just back of the oversized, toad-like heads of the Flesso, though it didn't matter much where the beam landed. The result was the same. The survivors were conferring hissingly and evincing great confusion. Apparently, they still thought the fire was coming from somewhere within the ship, but they were unable to figure out where. There were 8 of them left. Martin picked off one of them with his 9th charge, then held fire. He had 1 charge left, and there would be a 30-second delay while the Spauldings recharged themselves. He didn't want to leave himself defenseless even for 30 seconds. He counted off 10, 15, 20. 1 gun was charged. He raised it, ready to fire, when he heard a sudden telltale hiss from behind him. He whirled, but it was too late. A searing beam of energy cracked into him, hurtling him backwards. He clung to consciousness an instant, then blacked out as the beam shorted his neural circuits. When he awoke, Martin opened his eyes, blinked, closed them again. "Ugh," he said. He felt a savage poke in the stomach. "Open your eyes." "Do I have to?" "Open them." With visible reluctance, he opened his lids and stared into the bulging, lidless eyes of none other than Gúvikench Nathor himself. The Flesso leader was even uglier than usual. Very clever, Earthman, he said coldly. For that little trick you'll die, slowly. After we have extracted all the information we need from you, that is. Trick? Asked Martin blankly. Yes, getting out of the ship and shooting down my men. Dear me, Martin said innocently. I thought that was the smart thing to do, in view of your hostile attitude. I didn't realize you'd be so stuffy about it, but I'm sorry that you're so stupid, you— Silence! A heavy, clawed hand smashed across his face, slamming his head to one side. The enraged alien leader turned to a henchman at his side. Get the brain probe, Captain Ignor. At once, Commander. The captain waddled over to an elaborate-looking machine near the wall and removed its translucent hood. Martin looked at it and almost gasped. The thing was so much like the Terran model of a brain probe that only a practiced eye could tell them apart. Obviously, this machine worked on the same principle as the Earth-type brain probe did, and that, Martin reflected, was not a pleasant thought. You use that for picking your teeth, Guvek? You'll find out its use soon enough, Earthman. The Flesso scowled and signaled to the captain to wheel the brain probe over. No organic brain, Martin knew, could stand up against the mental energies of a brain probe. Within seconds, it could render any person a slave to the will of whoever operated the machine. Martin clenched his jaws grimly, ready to resist anything the Flesso could throw against him. There was always a chance that. Your mouth will be less full of insults when they are finished with you, Earthman. Oh, you're scaring me, Guvek. We'll see. Clamp down the helmet. The cold metal descended, and the captain anchored it tightly around Martin's skull. What shall I ask first, most noble sire? Captain Ignor asked. Gúvikench Nathor smiled harshly. I am interested in knowing how it was that he deflected the death-dealing beam that shot him down. It should have killed him, but it merely knocked him out. Ask the prisoner what protection he has. Ignor threw a switch, and a low buzzing hum throbbed in the room as the brain probe's generators went to work. Martin felt a faint tingling in his skull. Then Ignor turned a dial, and the probe sank into his brain. He held his breath as the energy projectors of the brain probe wandered around in his skull, seeking to gain hold. They failed. The Flesso model wasn't attuned to Earth minds, apparently. Why didn't the energy beam kill you? Captain Ignor asked. Because it missed me, said Martin calmly. A grin spread across Guvek's evil, toadish face. Good, he said exultantly. It missed him. But now we know that the Earthmen have no defense against our weapons. He rubbed his dry, scaly hands together. The next question, sire? Make him tell us about the defenses of Earth, Guvek said. I'll be damned if I will, you bloated monstrosity. Guvek's globular eyes blinked slowly in surprise. But you're supposed to be under the power of the machine. He turned his flat, batrachian head to glare at Captain Ignor. Turn up the power. Yes, sire. Ignor's thick claws wrenched up the dial, and a surge of power thundered through Martin's brain without leaving an impression. Feels nice, he said, like an extra special shampoo. But you wouldn't know what a shampoo is, would you? Up higher, Guvek snapped. That's as high as it goes, sire. Martin still sat there, sneering openly at the alien's attempts to read his brain. Guvek paced angrily around the seated Earthman without speaking. All right, he said finally. Shut the machine off. Obviously, the Earthman's brain just does not respond. There was anger and more than a touch of surprise in his voice. Take the brain probe away. Yes, sire. Guvek's eyes grew hard. There are, however, older and cruder ways. What do you say to torture, Earthman? I'm not much in favour of it, said Martin. I can't say I care for the idea at all. Good, Guvek said. Ignor, prepare the torture. No human being likes physical torture. The idea of having hot needles slid under one's fingernails, of having one's toenails removed by pincers, or being scourged with nerve whips, none of these were pleasant thoughts. Not pleasant, perhaps, but not unbearable so far as Martin was concerned. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But not once during the terrible ordeal did Martin either pass out or give any sign that the torture was more than he could bear. "What's the matter, Guvek? Slowing down?" At each taunt, the alien overlord grew uglier and angrier, and as the horror went on, Guvek seemed to become more and more frantic. None of the most delicate, subtle torture devised, and the Flesser were experts at devising torture, seemed to have any effect on the Earthman. He simply sat there, grimly, stoically. "You're boring me, Guvek," Martin remarked as an acid-tipped auger nibbled flesh from his chest. "But I'm willing to be cooperative. You'll notice I'm just sitting here patiently while you play with me." "Very well," Guvek stormed. "If that's your attitude, we'll see what can be done. Perhaps you Earthmen have no pain nerves, but at the sight of your very bodies being destroyed." "I think I've had about enough of this," Martin said. Flexing his muscles, he yanked one hand free of the torture chair and ripped the auger from his chest. He hurled the acid-tipped drill far across the room, where it smashed against the wall. Then he pulled his other arm free and with one final straining effort rose from the chair and stood unbound. "What?" Guvek's half-whispered question was almost impossible to hear. "You're free?" Captain Ickner opened his bulging eyes even wider and flattened himself against the wall, while Guvek gasped in terror. "I'm free," Martin said. "I got tired of having you play with me." He smiled cheerfully, and then sprang into life as one of the projectors that lined the wall, manned by guards outside, moved just a fraction of an inch. A burst of energy from one of those projectors could kill him, but it would kill anyone or anything else. He leapt on Guvek. He sensed the acrid, nauseating odor of the alien and wrapped his legs around the Flesso's body, pitching them both to the ground. The two of them rolled over against the far wall. A quick glance told Martin that the projectors in the walls were following, but they couldn't shoot for fear of hitting Guvek. The Flesso leader squirmed in Martin's grip as he tried to get his ray pistol out of its holster. "No, you don't," Martin said, and grabbed the alien's arm. Guvek grunted as Martin bent the arm upward and twisted until the ligaments creaked. "No!" Guvek moaned. "Drop the gun, then." The alien squirmed again. Martin twisted upwards, and there was a sharp crack, followed by another, the sound of the gun hitting the floor. Then something slammed against Martin's head from behind. Jerking his head aside, he crashed his fist against Guvek's temple to knock him out and reduce the opposition. Again something struck his head. This time Martin turned and grabbed a slimy wrist. It was Captain Ickner, who had been trying to knock Martin out with the butt of his pistol. Martin twisted viciously at the captain's wrist, and the ray pistol clattered to the floor. Ickner screamed in agony as a burning pain raced up his arm and swung wildly at Martin with his good arm. The savage claws raked the air just above the Earthman's head, and he drove in with a solid punch that made Ickner gasp. Martin followed his advantage with a smash to the face, sent the alien reeling away in pain, and in the same motion reached down and grasped one of the fallen ray pistols. He stepped over to Guvek's limp body and jabbed the pistol into the alien leader's scaly side. "All right," he said coldly. "Anything more, and I'll let Guvek Nathor have a fast burn through his guts." There was a stunned silence for a moment. Then the pain-racked voice of Captain Ickner said, "Don't shoot at the Earthman! Get away from those projectors!" The projector crew held fire. Martin waited tensely as Guvek moaned and stirred. 10 feet away, standing amidst the torture implements, the captain clutched his broken arm and watched the Earthman with terror in his eyes and pain evident on his face. Guvek blinked, his eyes opened. He looked dazed for a moment, then focused his eyes on Martin. His right arm, the Earthman noticed, was twisted horribly. Ignore. He's over there, Martin said. His arm didn't bend either, and if you move, I'll find out how resistant your innards are to a quick burn. Guvek shook his head bewilderedly. You've got us, Earthman. But how did it happen? How could one man take over a great battleship? It was easy, Martin said. Guvek moaned and looked at his mangled arm regretfully. I don't understand, the defeated alien commander said. Why did you let us torture you if you could get away so easily? Martin smiled. I wanted to teach you a lesson, he said. Earth's been patient with your marauding for a long time, and we put up with your sneak attack on Regulus. But the time has come to tell you to stop, or we'll wipe your whole race out of the galaxy. We're tired of your tactics, Guvek, and if one man can do this to you, what can a whole army of us do? There was a long silence before Guvek spoke, and when he spoke it was the voice of a being whose pride had been completely crushed. If we had known, he said weakly, swallowing. Who knew that Earthmen were supermen? You're the first we could capture, and it was all a trick. You let us capture you, to show us what you could do. Very smart, Guvek. You learn quickly. The alien passed one hand over his face. We'll call off our offensive at once. Good. Now I'll use your radio to call Earth and tell them you're on your way to arrange peace terms. At Earth Military Headquarters, General James Bedford snapped off the subspace radio and grinned at the man who faced him across the table, Colonel Parnell. You heard that, Parnell? The trick worked. He got them so scared of Earthmen that they're ready to come to terms. Colonel Parnell smiled. Fine deal all round. It cost us $10 billion to build Military Advanced Robot Number 10, not counting what we spent on the first 9 failures. But it was worth it. We've saved untold numbers of lives. The General nodded. Well worth it. Martin did the job perfectly.
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story.
Combatman by John Massie Davis, originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, October 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. As computer man, I was the first to come out of deep freeze after we kicked clear of the time warp. So I left the needles in my wrists. The tubes let me reach Brain 1 and started punching data from the instruments while my fingers were still half stiff. Finally, stiff fingers or not, I had all the data racked into the primary feed and decided to check on the passengers. It amused me somewhat to note that even Brain 1 was strictly stalling for time when it came to figuring out where we were and why. There was much buzzing and clicking, but no tape feeding out yet. Well, let the brain figure it out. I had other things to do. I strolled back to secondary freeze unit and checked Combatman. He was on top of the heap, of course, as stiff as a fresh steak, so I stuck the needles in his wrists and switched to defrost. Automatic lift pulled him out, and beneath him was the male homonorm and the 2 female homonorms. They came out too, as lifts worked, and pretty soon the cabin looked like a morgue, or a cannibal's shop if you prefer. Anyway, they were defrosting, so I left him to make a check on Brain 1 and see what brilliant, if mechanical, conclusion it had reached. Should be at least an hour before Combatman thawed, even with the needles pumping. Brain 1 was feeding out tape now, slow as a snail considering its cycling rate, so I figured we were a long way from home. Okay with me. I'd been around, and knew that if we could get somewhere, we could get back. But I wanted, and wanted bad, the data from time warp gauges, so I watched the tape, decoding mentally as it fed out and feeling, for a computer man, an emotion similar to impatience. We were approaching, the brain told me, a Type 3 planet. Radiation's okay, atmosphere higher in oxygen than home, gravity slightly lighter in pull than normal. The same junk I'd been picking up since we started colonizing. Land mass is stable, water in the air, semi-condensed. Good place for colonizing, and this pleased me. We were out to establish and leave the hominorms for a generation, and Brain 1 had figured all the details out while I was sitting in freeze like a hamburger. So far, so good. One thing annoyed or puzzled me. I kept throwing data from TV and radar into feedback and asking about population, life forms, land denizens. All Brain 1 came up with was insufficient data. All right, it would be just another routine landing on another distant planet. Then I heard the noise behind me and turned. Combatman stood in the doorway, his skin still bluish from the freeze, his eyes just clearing and working into focus. I looked him over while he stood there, somewhat surprised, if one can ever be surprised at what his race did. He was hung with enough weapons to stop a division of hominorms, and I wondered, as I always did, at the origin of his race. His type always came drifting down from somewhere north, back home, and all our radar and planes had never found their homeland. None of them ever talked with humans, except to nose in on our expeditions or break up our wars. This one was quite a specimen, maybe 6 feet, about 180 pounds, with the quiet and arrogant strength of his race. He took a deep breath, still leaning on the door frame. "Get me some whiskey," his voice was hoarse from disuse and the time warp, "and get it now." "Now see here," I began, "I'm Computerman and in charge of this ship and—" I didn't finish. With the quiet sureness of a jungle cat, he had crossed the room, taken a handful of my tunic, and lifted me from the chair, in spite of the fact that gravity was nearly normal now because of the landing jets. His voice was almost velvety. "Perhaps you didn't hear me. I will repeat once more." He paused while I considered striking him and then, sensibly, changed my mind. "Get me some whiskey." Then he dropped me back into the chair. I'm not Computerman for nothing, so I computed the situation in maybe 1,000th of a second. No one could push me around, so to prevent being pushed around, I got him his whiskey. He knocked off about half a pint at a swallow, and in a few minutes his skin lost its bluish tinge. He was awake, and his quick eyes swept the gauges and the TV radar image. "When do we land?" He made no attempt to be courteous. I checked Brain 1's tape, somewhat rattled. 21 minutes, 4 seconds, I started, resisting a strange impulse to say, "Sir." "Near water, fresh, altitude under 1 mile from—" "That's all," he said. "Thanks." He left the room like a cat, crouching slightly as he went through the door, leaping through and backing against the wall, but fast once he cleared. His weapons, all of them, were so skillfully hung that he didn't make a sound. Somehow, I enjoyed watching the play of those muscles and felt rather glad to have him along, rough as he was. Outlying planets often have warlike combat organizations of their own, and combatmen have saved many expeditions like this. Something in their nature, or training, or both, seems to make them invincible. I turned back to Brain 1, checked the wiring on the denizen circuit, and tried to get more information about possible inhabitants. No luck. Either there were none, or they were so highly civilized they could block off our probing rays. That had happened before, and it usually meant a minor war. We always won, though we sometimes had to dig in and send for the control fleet from home. The fleet was run by combatmen, though no hominorm had ever figured out how they eased into all the key positions. They were quite a race, all right. So I sat watching the radar screen and the planet enlarging rapidly. It looked pretty good. A quarter to a third landmass, I guessed, just like home. Combatman came back in the room, quietly. "Your pap-fed colonists are waking," he grunted. "Better go and wet-nurse them. They might catch cold." He sat down in the pilot's chair, much to my annoyance, and swilled away at his bottle. I noticed he'd replaced the original crock, and felt a moment's concern. After all, we depended for basic safety on his training in the event of encountering hostility. He seemed utterly unconcerned as he lazily watched the screen. The hominoms were doing all right, complaining as usual about the cold, and asking silly questions about where we were and what year it was, or would be at home. I ducked the questions, gave them their hypos, and went back to Brain 1 and the control panel. One look at the controls, and I started boiling. This was the last straw. "Now, goddammit," I started. "You can boss me around, but when it comes to—" "Shut up." "I will not shut up." "Okay." He was calm, leisurely even. But before I realized it, he was rising, crossed the room, and I had an arm behind me. It didn't hurt, but I felt pretty helpless. Completely helpless, to be truthful. "Could it be," he appeared to be bored, "that you are tired of having two arms?" He twisted slightly, and I got the idea, so I shut up for the second time. After a few seconds, he sat down in my chair and had another drink. When I could talk without sputtering, I worked up my mildest voice. "Would you tell me?" I almost choked on the next word. "Please? What in hell is the idea of circling at 20 miles and dropping to 10 and circling some more? We're wasting tons of fuel which we may need for—" "Sure, brainy one, I'll tell you. I want to see what this place looks like, and I'm picking the landing site, not you or that pile of rattling tin there." He gestured contemptuously at Brain 1. "Pile of tin!" I couldn't say more, so I went back to the rear and helped the hominoms find food and the simple plastic clothes they'd been wearing. The ship lurched suddenly as it changed course at 20 miles and started circling. Even back here, I could hear Brain 1 clacking in protest over the conflicting instructions. That big lunk of a fighting man, of course, hadn't had sense enough to punch clear and recompute when he changed course, and I could see the tape in my mind's eye pouring frantically out with "Data please, data please." Oh well. Hominoms were thawing out okay, but crying like babies from time warp sickness and space fright. I expected this and let them cry it out. Meanwhile, I got busy with sensory receptors to see if anything we knew of could be blocking Brain 1's circuits. This lack of info about the denizens had me a little worried. It wasn't often Brain 1 came up with a blank on any subject. It made me furious to be working like mad here while that big oaf lounged in my chair, slopping up a year's supply of stimulant. Defending the ship was his job. He should be trying to find out what was doing below us. Instead, he sat around watching radar screen just like he was watching the fights his race staged back home for amusement. The ship lurched violently. Then it lurched again. I started forward, worried, but the tail jets blasted, and I slammed against a wall, pinned it tight. The pressure cut my wind and I fainted. My last recollection was the smell of scorching duralumin. We'd been hit by something. When I revived, we were back at Gravnorm, and I staggered, literally, back to control. My nose was still bleeding, and the hominoms, of course, were still unconscious. Combatman sat comfortably in my padded chair, almost dreamily watching the screen. I felt a surge of anger. Then I realized I was too feeble to support such an emotion. Remembering my psycho training, I redirected to curiosity. "What?" My voice sounded pretty shaky, and Combatman handed me the bottle, grinning. "Quite a race down there." He seemed pleased. Then he spat expertly, the result landing on the radar screen. "Can you work that thing?" "Of course," I muttered, half insulted. "Okay, we're at 100 miles. Get that in focus as of 2 miles, slow the ship, and prepare to hold stationary when I see what I want to know." Weakly, I fumbled with the controls, sniffling back the blood from my nose. "And turn off this tin god of yours," he continued. "That clacking racket annoys me." Casually, he kicked the part of Brain 1 nearest him, which was the back of wiring panel 6. "Oh no," I began. But I did as I was told, and ran Brain 1 through 3 clearing cycles just to make sure. There was no telling what this lummox may have done in my absence. Now I'd have to check everything and feed in the information all over again. Combatman leaned back in the chair like he expected dental work and yawned luxuriously. He watched as the screen blurred and focused, blurred and focused. It was sweeping at 2 miles, and the ship was slowing. We dropped tail down, and grav changed faster than the interior hull moved. Finally, we settled, and coasted above this planet. The ship lurched, twice this time, almost simultaneously. Then it lurched steadily. Combatman threw the all-screen switch and watched the radar. By now, he was tense. "At 100 miles, he muttered. "What a race this is." He watched the screen with eyes that reminded me more of a cat's than a human's. "Stop." From habit, I threw the master out switch and everything stopped. Our motion coordinated precisely with the planets. The radar focused where it had been, and I got slammed against a wall again, of course. Well, I might as well get used to it. When my eyes cleared, I studied the image. It was a rather crude city of considerable size, though poorly designed from the light, ventilation, and transport angle. There was considerable movement, apparently ground vehicles of some sort. Then I looked at Combatman. His face was registering disbelief and something resembling alarm, though I'd never heard of any of his race being really frightened. The missile warning light blinked frantically, and the ship started lurching and pitching again. Combatman turned toward me, and his face was taut and urgent. "How soon can you get into time warp?" And leave?" "Right, the sooner the better." He flipped the height control, and we moved, smoothly this time, up, away from the missiles blasting outside our protective screen. "There will be no colonizing done here." But our orders were to—" "No colonizing here. Put your hominomes back in the freezer and set up for return. Do it now." Stunned, I went rearward and told the people. They didn't like the idea very much, but regulations said that when the ship was attacked, Combatman was absolute boss. Then I returned. Combatman shot a glance at me and I nodded, then went to work on the control panel, reversing the whole setup. "When you finish, I'll get in your icebox," Combatman said. "And when you get out of time warp, destroy that wiring. None of your ships are to come back here." I digested this slowly, wondering how to report to the council. "Why not?" I ventured. "Perhaps with part of the control fleet." "The whole control fleet wouldn't last 2 days on a desert of that world, brain boy," he said. His eyes misted faintly for a fraction of a second. "Those denizens, as you call them, are all members of my race, and this planet was my home. We called it Earth." He yawned and strode to the rear and the freezer. At the portal he turned and grinned. "And don't ask me how we get back and forth. I might get mad and have my whole family drop over, in-laws and all." I didn't really understand him, so went on with my wiring.
The End. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story.
Invader from Infinity by George Whittington. Originally published in Planet Stories, Winter, 1944. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Commander John McPartland stared with hard blue eyes into his view screen. He watched a tiny dot in one corner grow slowly, then heard the unnecessary words of his lieutenant commander, Clemens. "Observation officer reports enemy craft sighted, sir." "Very good," acknowledged McPartland. "Have Lieutenant Parrick compute their speed and course." Clemens spoke softly into the intraship phone, and Commander John McPartland returned momentarily to his thoughts. His square jaw was set as though cast in bronze, with hard muscles machined into its contour. Here was the enemy, the unknown, the alien, who spoke only with destruction. This was the ship that had destroyed system patrols, later a full battle fleet of the solar system's most powerful space fighters. The interceptors had been unable to establish communication of any sort, and they were blasted into fiery chunks of space debris before getting close enough to use their own guns. "Well, here they are, Clemens," the commander said aloud, "and getting uncomfortably close to the system. It looks like there's some other system's dominant intelligence, and we've got planets they want." "Yes, sir," said the other, "and here we are with the fastest, most heavily armed space fighter ever built in the system." "In the universe," snapped McPartland. His full lips curved into a grim smile. "And the sealed orders which every citizen from Pluto to Mercury knows are, destroy this ship, or it conquers our system." Lieutenant Commander Clemens bent to his intraphone, turned to relay. "Navigation officer reports enemy ship has altered course to head-on. Speed 50 spatial units." "Thank you." McPartland stepped to the phone himself. "This is it, men. You know what it means." His hands flicked levers swiftly as he spoke to component units individually. "Propulsion, full speed ahead. Make every blast tell. Navigation, evasive course. Swing wide to draw them away from the system so that if... "I understand, sir," came the crisp reply from Lieutenant Parrick. "All ray stations," went on McPartland. "Fire at maximum range. Radio, any contact?" "None, sir." "Magnetic screen interference?" asked the commander. "No, sir. No magnetic defense screens apparent on enemy." "Put ours up on full power." John McPartland was smiling now, but his eyes were flashing hatred of the alien. Another 10 seconds would find them in effective range. The enemy was looming in the view screen, a round, glistening sphere, a ball of destruction pitted against his own slim, sleek Avenger. "Screens up, sir. Full power," came the response. Lieutenant Commander Clemens had headphones clamped over his ears. He was standing by for reports from stations. He turned suddenly, face lined and taut, and reported almost in a whisper. "We're hit, sir. Right through our screens at this range. Partial disintegration in Section 4. Bulkheads holding." The commander was standing wooden-faced, incredulous, but the hatred was building up in his eyes until Clemens shuddered. "Through our defense screens at this range," McPartland ground out savagely. He turned back to his view screen with a bitter oath. There was the sphere, gleaming, flashing against the bottomless black of space, catching starlight and throwing it back as though the touch of that pure light was distasteful. What form of intelligence destroyed, killed without warning, without speech? Clemens's voice broke into the red haze that hovered over his commander. "Hit again, sir. Section 8. Almost complete disintegration of the hull. Bulkheads holding." John McPartland spoke his thoughts aloud. "I saw the ray that time. Just a faint glimmer across the black. It should have hit Section 6. And they have no magnetic screen." His hand flicked a lever. "Navigation, break away. Straight course back toward the system." There was a long pause before Lieutenant Parrick replied. It was easy to guess his thoughts. Quitting, running away. Then he answered, "Yes, sir." Clemens's voice, speaking softly to the intra-ship, was suddenly the only sound in the control room above the muted whine of generators underneath. John McPartland, his battle-ending order acknowledged, glared silently into his screen. There, the hateful silver sphere shrank slightly in size. Once again McPartland caught the faint flicker of a ray, the star-studded blackness. The commander looked a fierce question at Clemens. "No further damage, sir," said the latter. He laid the headphones aside. "I believe we're out of range. Lieutenant Parrick reports our speed 65 spatial units. We are drawing away from the enemy." There was no relief in the last words, and Commander McPartland felt a sudden surge of sympathy for the other break through his own bitter anger. Clemens had been gloomy about their chances in the battle. Now, the Earthship broke away from the fight. The lieutenant commander was gloomier in the belief that they hadn't tried hard enough, that they'd turned in cowardly flight. His eyes avoided his superiors. The latter looked about the room, and no glance was raised to meet his own. Reynolds, the ray control officer, stared glumly at his calculators and fingered the phone that had waited vainly for his range data and fire commands. Clemens stood quietly, awaiting orders. Engineer McTavish sat in stony silence, gazed fixed on the desk before him, where sensitive indicators flashed red damage signals against a three-dimensional scale projection of the ship. McPartland felt his eyes misting and ground his teeth, remembering the alien ship and using his hatred of it to fight back the weakness of his own pride in his men. They wanted to fight. They hated cowardice almost as much as they did the murderers they were running from, and these Earthmen thought their own commander a coward. But discipline and training held them to his judgment. "Hell," barked McPartland, "we're going back after them." His words shattered the silence and the gloom. Reynolds's face was suddenly radiant. Clemens relaxed into an expression of smug worry. McTavish grunted. "Mr. McTavish, what about that damage?" demanded the commander. Engineer McTavish brought his lanky form up from the chair into rigidity. "You gave no orders, sir," he reproached, his grey eyes eager. "Have your men break out 2 spacesuits, mister," said McPartland. "You and I will go through the bulkheads and inspect the damaged hull." "Yes, sir." McTavish turned eagerly to his phone. "Mr. Clemens," snapped the commander, "hold our course, and you may tell the men we're not through fighting." McPartland and McTavish stepped carefully through the darkness of Section 4. Behind them, the bulkhead door had been securely dogged shut against the vacuum of space. Before them was a ragged jet patch from which distant stars sent faint light to outline the great rip in the hull. Both men carried powerful flashlights, but preferred to step carefully among dim outlines rather than use lights until they reached the hull. There had been a ray gun here, and its crew. And men suddenly exposed to cold and pressureless space make grim corpses. At the thought, McPartland's big hand gripped the hammer he carried so that he almost felt the handle through its heavy gauntlet. He had an insane desire to leap out and wait for the other ship to batter at its silver hull. As though sensing the thought, the engineer broke in, speaking through his suit communicator. "Here we are, sir." The flashlight blazed in his hand, its beam spreading along the twisted, broken metal of the ship's side. Instantly, the big hammer flashed into the beam, and against the metal near its broken edge swung with every ounce of fury and strength in John McPartland's arm, shoulder, and torso. "If I'm right," he muttered with a swing, "we'll know it now. We'll have a fighting chance." He faltered on the last word, as his blow landed and sent some of its force smashing back up his arm and body. But the commander knew, as a smith knows, the feel of metal under his strength, and John McPartland knew his hunch had been right, even before McTavish cried, You bent it!" "Right, mister, I bent it, and I couldn't bend the steel that went into this ship's hull, could I, McTavish?" "Blasting right you couldn't. Begging your pardon, sir, no man could." "Then it isn't steel any longer, McTavish, not near the edges of the spot their ray hit." McPartland twirled the hammer in his hand, eager as a small boy just learning how to whip the neighborhood bully. "Where that ray hit, there was a disintegration at the center, transmutation at the edges." Understanding was spreading over the engineer's face behind the transparent helmet of his spacesuit. "Then, man, that ray has one magnetic charge, positive or negative, proton or electron." "And your technicians will tell us which," ordered the commander. "Get them busy cutting out samples. We want to know quickly, but you and I have enough to do while we wait, mister." He led the way back to the bulkhead. Inside, McTavish gave orders while shedding his spacesuit and starting down the corridor to the control room. McPartland explained as they went. "Our magnetic screens, having electrons and protons, bent their ray. I saw it. That made me think they used a monocharged stream of particles. Some of the particles in the screen attracted the ray charges, others repelled them. You know, of course," he went on, "how our screens diffuse our own type of duocharge beam at long range and protect the ship against them." "Yes, man," his engineer agreed, excitedly now. "And beams from the screened ship go through on initial velocity. But they couldn't use a screen. The enemy. There'd be no balance of forces. They'd bend their own ray." "The way we'll bend it, mister, when we go back after those murderers." John McPartland took a deep, triumphant breath, and his face lit up with a battle smile that made the engineer's heart lift. "Mr. McTavish, we're going to string a space lifeboat out behind us on about 2 miles of cable. You are going to rig up our dynamos to make this ship and the lifeboat the poles of an electromagnet. When your technicians determine the polarity of the enemy ray, we'll make the ship the repelling pole." "Then, man, begging your pardon, sir, we go back and let them blast," cried the engineer. "Their ray curves away from us, toward the lifeboat. By the time they figure the trick out, we'll be close enough to blast them wide open." "We'd better be," his superior concluded grimly, "or the devils will blast away the lifeboat and the cable, leave us without an electromagnet, right back where we started from." Commander John McPartland stared with hard blue eyes into his screen. He watched a dot growing into a sphere, and anticipating the words of Lieutenant Commander Clemens, ordered, "Have Lieutenant Parrick compute their speed and course." Clemens, with a look of gloomy reproach at not having been allowed to report, bent to the intraship phone. Before he could speak, he straightened and turned to relay the information coming through his headphones. "Navigation officer reports course head-on, sir. Speed 50 spatial units." "Thank you." The commander looked at his engineer. "All in readiness, Mr. McTavish?" "All in readiness, sir," replied the lanky engineer, his grey eyes twinkling as he added, "They're using an electron ray, and our ship is negative. But this'll be a positive jolt to the enemy, begging your pardon, sir." McPartland smiled, the tense muscles along his jaw relaxing for the first time in hours. Clemens coughed and turned aside, bringing a hand up over his mouth. The effort to preserve his reputation was needed only for a moment. He straightened, adjusting his headphones, and reported, "Enemy ship changing course, sir, swinging aside." The commander glanced quickly at the screen, disbelief flicking momentarily over his square features. He leaped to the intraphone, snatching the headphones from the lieutenant commander. "Mr. Parrick," he ordered, "swing with that ship. We must get in close, quickly." Aside to McTavish, he added, "I hope the cable to that spaceboat holds when it snaps around on this turn." "It will hold, sir," the engineer assured him, "but we'll lose some speed by the drag, only until we re-accelerate, sir." McPartland tossed the headphones back to Clemens, left the intraphone, and went back to his screen. For the next few minutes he watched the alien silver sphere flashing and glinting in the starlight. John McPartland whispered, half to himself, "The cunning devils! They know something's up when the beaten ship comes back to fight again." "Begging your pardon, sir," said Reynolds, the ray control officer, in his quiet manner. "They must have seen the spaceboat strung behind and become suspicious." "You're right, mister," acknowledged the commander. "The killers are careful of their skins." He glared at the hateful beauty of the other ship, growing no larger in his screen. "Come on," he challenged. But the enemy avoided every effort of the Earth ship to close in, turning inside. At last, the space fighters were carving a great circle in space, the Earthmen on the outside, travelling a greater distance so that superior speed was largely nullified. McPartland glared into his screen. Clemens stood by his intraphone, relaying messages from Parrick. Reynolds sat before his calculators, unmoving except for fingers caressing the mic that still waited for his words. McTavish sprawled before his three-dimensional model, his grey eyes going over and over every line of it. At last the commander spoke the thought in the minds of all four. "We're 6 spatial units apart. Maximum range of their ray is 5 units. Ours is 4. Coming head-on, we passed through the gap between their range and ours in seconds. We almost made it last time. But if we overhaul them from behind, it might take minutes to close that gap with our speed advantage." "Right, sir," McTavish agreed. "And minutes would be long enough for them to blast our spaceboats and cable away." "And then us," finished Clemens. He drew himself up. "I am ready, sir, when you give the order." Blazing anger faded from the commander's eyes and face. "Thank you, Mr. Clemens. I know you are, and so is every man of our crew. But we're here to save the system, and there's still hope." "These animals have come a long way," he said, jabbing a fist toward the ship and the screen. "They think they can afford to wait us out. But maybe they can't. Mr. Clemens, ask radio to try and contact Earth." It took long, anxious minutes to make the contact. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Parrick held the ship on the same course, with instructions to close at once if the enemy moved toward them. But the situation remained unchanged, the great circle being traced and retraced through space, ray guns trained, unused. At last, radio reported contact. John McPartland stepped to the visophone. Before him, the faint image of Marshal Denton, Supreme Commander of all system forces, flickered uncertainly over the great distance. "McPartland," came the Marshal's voice, thin and wavering through the poor connection. "I knew you'd do it." McPartland saluted smartly. "We have met the enemy, sir, and stopped their advance toward the system, but—" He went on, reporting their first encounter, his decision and action, and concluded, "Sir, we can hold them here until help reaches us. One more ship, rigged as we are, even the slowest old hulk in the fleet, and we can finish them." There was a long pause. Marshal Denton drew himself up. His face, only a dim blob on the screen, gave no hint of his emotions as he answered, "Commander McPartland, I must refuse your request for reinforcements." There was no mistaking his feeling in the next words. "John, I've got a system of confidence in you, but my hands are tied. The Supreme System Congress of Specialists has met and made decisions for defense, decisions that are not subject to change. From here on, I can only carry their strategy into effect." McPartland stood rigidly. He was stunned. He heard his own voice, as from far away. "And those decisions, sir?" "Every ship we have is concentrated just beyond Pluto's orbit," Denton answered. "They are arranged in a defensive pattern of depths that the specialists consider impenetrable." His voice was even. "Sir," the commander groaned, "this attacker has a range and array that makes our magnetic screens useless. These fiends will go through that fleet like light through glass. And the planets, they've been disarmed for years. They'll be defenseless." In the screen, the marshal's dim figure slumped. "John, the specialists rule the system." "I understand, sir," McPartland heard himself say. "What are your orders, sir?" "Just your best, Commander John McPartland. That will be the best any of us could give. Good luck." "Thank you, sir." McPartland turned from the visaphone as Marshal Denton faded from view. Lieutenant Commander Clemens stood ready beside his intraphone. Engineer McTavish sprawled before his model, his grey eyes going lovingly over every line of it. Ray Control Officer Reynolds fingered his mic. John McPartland swept them with his blue eyes, turned to glare again at the taunting silver sphere in his view screen. He started to speak, stopped as Reynolds raised his head. "Beg your pardon, sir," said the Ray officer. "May I give the men false range data when you decide we're finished, sir? I'll feel better just using this stuff, and the gun crews, those that are left, will feel better thinking they're striking a blow for the system." "It can't do any harm, sir," he pleaded as the commander snapped his mouth shut, staring hard. "Reynolds," bellowed the commander, "ages ago there was an air fighter who opened fire on his enemy with machine guns before he was in range. The opponent usually took evasive action, thinking he was in danger, and lost speed so that his fighter could overtake and destroy him. Reynolds, you're a genius." "Man," interrupted McTavish, "our rays would fall short. Those devils wouldn't be fooled by rays. 2 spatial units away." "No, Mr. McTavish," his superior replied slowly. "Our disintegrator rays wouldn't fool them. But we have landing searchlights that throw a beam a dozen spatial units. McTavish, get down to those beams. Stop a couple down to pencils. Shade them to throw a pretty violet-coloured finger. Cut down the power so that they'll reach about 6 units. Get out of here." The engineer's lanky body was already through the control room door. John McPartland was grinning. A grin that didn't fade even when he looked back to his screen to see the glinting silver sphere swinging serenely along beside them. He turned to Clemens. "Tell Lieutenant Parrick to close at full speed the second they start for us. No evasive action. Straight course, and let the spaceboat and cable take it." "Navigation acknowledges, sir," Clemens replied solemnly, and the commander knew his lieutenant had anticipated and given the order. "All ray stations ready, sir," added the quiet Reynolds. McPartland's grin broadened. "Give them the straight data, Mr. Reynolds." "Yes, sir." It was only seconds later that a voice rang in Clemens's headphones in accents loud enough to be heard through the silent, waiting control room. "McTavish reporting. All in readiness." "Let them have it, then," ordered the commander. "But be sure you miss." With the suddenness of calculated surprise, a thin pencil of violet light stabbed out from the Earth ship. It knifed through space, scant yards behind the silver sphere, and winked out. A second beam reached forth, passed beneath the gleaming enemy. Immediately, the sphere, bobbed in space, began to weave an intricate course toward the Earth ship. It swelled in the view screen before McPartland. He laughed, a low, savage sound. "A super race ego to think our gunners are that bad. But they'll learn." Reynolds began to drone into his phone, his eyes never leaving the calculators over which his fingers were flying. "Range 5 units. Position." A faint flicker reached toward the Earthship, swung aside. McPartland laughed again. "Range 4.9, droned Reynolds, and went on with steady flow of data. The pale alien beam reached out again. This time Clemens reported, "Spaceboat destroyed by direct hit, sir." "Range 4.6, said Reynolds. The sphere was looming ahead of them now, its rays sweeping off to the side, direction steady even as the sphere danced and spun. "Range 4.1. "Cable almost completely gone, sir," Clemens said. "Steady," McPartland answered. He took a deep breath and heard the voice of the ray control officer rising triumphantly. "Units 1, 3, 5, and 7. Fire! Range 4.0. Position!" 4 livid fingers of red sprang hungrily toward the silver sphere. They struck almost together, followed as the ship twisted and spun for brief moments. Then, when the ball of metal suddenly ceased its gyrations and floated limply, helplessly in space, those fingers probed, slashed unhindered through its vitals, over every foot of hull. It was a scene of awesome destruction, as the ship that had thrown back starlight so proudly, haughtily, was blotted out of existence, its atoms torn apart and hurled back to the universe as free energy. The glow in his view screen threw red highlights into McPartland's black hair, matched the blazing vengeance in his blue eyes. But he watched, jaw hard, fist clenched, until destruction was complete. "They got what they gave our ships," he said at last. "Merciless destruction. They deserved no better. We'll go back to the system and turn in our report. Our scientists will perfect a defense against a monocharge ray, and we won't need to worry about handling any other ships that might follow this one." "Right, sir," said McTavish. "And man, begging your pardon, sir, I hope we're in on the handling." Lieutenant Commander Clemens shook his head moodily. "We did well, but the Congress of Specialists will be disappointed. We didn't bring back prisoners for examination." But his eyes were smiling again.
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story.
Out of the Dark Nebula by Milton L. Coe. Originally published in Planet Stories, May 1951. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The bulkheads of the mighty battleship rocked with a song welling from 5,000 throats, as the young, eager voices swelled into the chorus of the Spaceman's Hymn. Vice Admiral Jack Harrigan felt a lump grow in his own throat. Captain Mike O'Brien, short, muscular, and definitely Irish, joined the Admiral at the balcony hatch. Together they looked down upon the huge ship's auditorium. "It's a long, long way to the Milky Way," the chorus rose, fell, faded, and died. Harrigan nodded to O'Brien, and the two men matched strides down that passageway. "Something on your mind, Jack?" O'Brien asked. "Oh, I don't know, Mike. I just got to thinking about the old days. I guess, hearing those kids singing. The Force is all glory to them. Color, ceremony, power. Flitting around the galaxy like this. Cream of the crop they are. And every last one of them fought to get in the Force. But I wonder how they'd face up to the other side of this business." "Combat?" O'Brien screwed up his face. "Yeah, boy. Combat like we saw, with our backs to the wall and 9/10 of the galaxy howling for our heart's blood. Wonder if they'd change their minds about the Force." He jerked his thumb back towards the auditorium. "If it came again." "Dunno," Mike shrugged. "Maybe old Fitzsimmons wondered about us the same way when we went on our shakedown cruise. We were a sad bunch, I'll admit. But we didn't pan out too bad, did we, Jack?" The two officers had reached the observation deck. The Milky Way stretched a hazy filament across the heavens. Harrigan drew a long breath, hooked his thumbs in his belt, and smiled. "No, Mike, not bad at all, if I do say so. It was rugged while we were going through it, I suppose, but things have been quiet for so long now. Damn it, we did have fun, didn't we, Mike?" Mike grinned crookedly. "Fun is right. Remember the time Shorty Michaels caught those two Xantu ships flat-footed behind the coal sack?" "Yeah, blew 'em to hell and back, and found out later they were the two strongest ships in the Xantu fleet, if they had seen him first. Brother, he shook for a week after they told him." Mike roared with laughter. "Battle wagons, and Shorty with a destroyer." "And how about that time the gang of Zith stinkers ambushed us on Sirius 5? Were they surprised when their water pistols didn't kill us? They didn't know that water isn't quite as fatal to a Terran as it is to a Zith." "Yeah," O'Brien said, "and I'll never forget the smile on Cap Martin's face as he sprayed him with the ship's fire hose." "Well," the Admiral said, sobering, "if you'd seen the pitiful remains in their slave camps on Sirius 7, the way Cap and I did—" He shook his head slowly. "We should have bounced a couple of duodec bombs off their home planet, and on Xantu too. Finished the job right." The captain gazed down at his shoes. "We might get the chance yet. Any news lately?" "Not much. Just the usual rumblings from the dark nebulas. But I agree with HQ that the Xantu are at the bottom of it, without a doubt. You never know when those varmints are going to start trouble. That's the reason for all this hush-up preparation. We're going to be ready at the drop of a helmet if anybody wants to wrestle." "Smart move by HQ for once," Mike said. "Never hurt to be ready for—" A communications orderly saluted smartly. "Pardon, sir, HQ, double urgent." Harrigan took the flimsy from the orderly and scanned it quickly. His face went slack. "Good Lord, O'Brien, hear this. Dark Nebula forces simultaneously attacked Rigel Patrol Post in Capella 2 Settlement 1400 hours. Personnel annihilated. Fleet headed by Xantu elements headed Sector 1. Return to base immediately." "Sector 1? Sol? Alpha Centauri? Sirius Sector?" Mike whistled and shook his head. "They'll cut us off before we can reach Terra." "They will if we don't get a move on," the Admiral snapped. "And we can't fight with a green crew. Got to get these kids back to Terra." Harrigan leaped to the audio. His orders were short and sharp. "Drive room, Joe, full speed home, boy. The bubble's busted wide open." "Quartermaster, Wilson, prepare to issue battle suits. Central, give me the system, thanks." He cleared his throat. "All hands hear this. A state of war exists between the Solar Federation and the Dark Nebula League. We will attempt to reach Terra Base before being cut off by the enemy fleet. However, just in case, we will be ready. Battle stations." The next few hours were hectic ones, especially for the few seasoned officers aboard the battleship Albion. The Albion was a fairly new ship. She was fast, heavily armored, and carried the latest guns, 3 facts which Harrigan hoped would save them from disaster. He realized that HQ had to break radio silence to notify them of the sudden outbreak of hostilities, but he also knew that the enemy had undoubtedly intercepted the message, plotted the Albion course, and sent a half-dozen of their fastest ships in hot pursuit. That's the way the Dark Nebula League liked to fight, 6-1. Harrigan figured that he just might be able to outrun them, but if the League ships did manage to cut them off from Terra, well, he hated the idea of fighting that bunch of cutthroats with a crew of green kids. Ordinarily, new spacemen were distributed among crews of seasoned men at a ratio about 1 in 10. To be in top fighting condition, the Albion should carry 4,000 regulars and 400 greenies. There were 5,000 men on board. 150 old-line officers, 50 newly commissioned officers, and 4,800 Terran youngsters fresh out of ground school. The officers had done their best to whip the crew into the semblance of a fighting unit. If a fracas did develop, they might squeeze through if the kids could follow orders. But in battle, things happened almost too fast to be covered by orders. A man had to think for himself. Harrigan found himself staring through the forward screen, wishing that 3,000 or 4,000 hardened space marines would suddenly materialize out of thin air. O'Brien came steaming up. He sat down beside the Admiral, lit a cigarette, and said, "Phwee!" "Right you are," Harrigan answered. "Things sure popped, didn't they?" "And how? Think we ought to prowl?" "Guess so. We're going to watch things mighty damned close till we hit base. Better check the gun banks. And by the way, Mike, who had the controls when that order came in?" "Young chap named McDaniels." "And his navigator?" "Rose. Why?" "Have them report to me when they come off. They're to be congratulated for getting us away fast and right. If the rest of the crew picks up as fast as those two, we'll make out okay. Let's have a look at those banks." The Albion's 8 gun banks spangled the ship from nose to tubes like stripes on a watermelon. Each bank was divided into A, B, and C sections, 4 aft and centre. 48 men and 2 officers manned each section. The atomic cannon in the nose were fired only by the ship's master gunner, a sardonic expert named Irvington. At number 6 gun bank, Harrigan and O'Brien entered section C hatch. O'Brien's mouth fell open. Along the catwalk behind the gun emplacements proper, men lounged and leaned. One slept. Several were smoking, and most of them had thrown back their helmets. Of the 48, 3 had their eyes on the finder screens. "Attention!" Harrigan roared, and 50 men jerked erect like puppets on a string. "Get your helmets up and your eyes on those screens, and keep them there until you're ordered off. This isn't a shakedown any longer. This is war." He turned to O'Brien. "Who's in charge here?" "Lieutenant Sanderson." "Leave the ensign in charge and have Sanderson report to the bridge at once." Harrigan stooped through the hatch. "And, Mike, see that the word is passed along to the remaining gun crews. Damned if I'll see a repeat of this." "Yes, sir," Mike answered, and turned toward the nervous lieutenant. "Report to the bridge, mister, and prepare to be chewed." Sanderson managed a weak, "Yes, sir." Harrigan was pacing the bridge when McDaniels and Rose came in, stood at attention, and saluted crisply. The Admiral returned the salute. "Relax, gentlemen. I called you here to commend you both personally for your fast, clear thinking under the stress of emergency. Cool-headedness under strain is taken as a matter of course in the Space Forces, but in this case your actions served as an example to an inexperienced crew and are therefore doubly appreciated by the officers of this ship. Sit down." The 2 men took seats, and Harrigan relaxed behind his own massive desk. "I was with your father at cadet school, McDaniels, and later at the Battle of Canopus. Where is the commander now?" McDaniels, short and pudgy, answered proudly, "He took command of Polaris Base 1 just before we left on the cruise, sir." "Oh?" "The kid doesn't know yet," Harrigan thought. "If the Force can't stem the League attack damned quick, old McDaniels and his men will be the expendables in this scrap." But the kid sitting before him was so eager and obviously proud of his father that the Admiral hadn't the heart to tell him the true score. "Sir," Rose piped up, "are you the same Officer Harrigan that Dad mentioned during the first campaign? He was Master Navigator on the old Cometeer." "I certainly am," Harrigan smiled broadly. "Red Rose was the best navigator I ever had. He could plot you half a way around the galaxy and land you in your barracks just in time for supper. How long has it been now? 6 years? 7? Rose looked at the floor. 7, sir. He was hunting Calabs on Callista when the landslide caught him." "I'm sorry, deeply sorry." Footsteps sounded in the passageway, and the lieutenant, Sanderson, came in, followed closely by O'Brien. The lieutenant tucked his cap under his elbow, smoothed back his thick hair, and saluted. Harrigan gazed at the man for a long moment. "Lieutenant, perhaps the seriousness of our circumstances has not impressed you fully, but the Albion, carrying this inexperienced crew, stands in imminent danger of being overwhelmed by the League fleet, or at best being cut off from Terran base. Therefore, I think it—" Oops! Harrigan had knocked his water pitcher to the floor. The plastic didn't break, but water splashed. Sanderson jumped back convulsively, his face white. O'Brien motioned an orderly to mop up the mess, and the Admiral went on. "You are a seasoned junior officer, Sanderson. Your record is excellent. Otherwise, some form of punishment would be in order. I shouldn't need to repeat that it is your duty to keep your crew on the alert until we are out of danger. Dismissed." The lieutenant saluted and turned to leave. "Oh, Sanderson, one more thing." Harrigan rose and walked around the desk. "Yes, sir?" The Admiral faced the lieutenant, and, before the dumbfounded eyes of Rose, McDaniels, and the orderly, very deliberately drew his service blaster and shot Sanderson dead center between the eyes. McDaniels gulped. Rose jumped up trembling. The orderly let his mop fall with a clatter. O'Brien winked at Harrigan. "Great hell, you've killed him!" Rose found his voice. "That I have. That gentleman," Harrigan pointed to the corpse, "is a Zith." An immediate babble of "whys" and "how do you knows" filled the air. "Look," the Admiral motioned, and the men gathered round the corpse. Harrigan stooped, ran his fingers through the thick black hair, and came up with two fleshy, antenna-like appendages about 4 inches in length, which sprouted from the skull an inch or so above the hairline. "On the Zith home planet, their religion requires that the head be cleanly shaven, and these antennae are a source of pride. But when a Zith wishes to pass for a Terran, he allows his hair to grow, and as long as the antennae are kept flat, he has a fair chance of going undetected. It's one of the oddities of the universe that the Zith and Terran, so unlike in temperament, are, to the eye, unlike only in this small way. But in Terran company, most Ziths acquire the nervous habit of continually running their hands over their hair to make sure that the antennae are well hidden." "But a lot of Terrans have the habit of smoothing down their hair," Rose objected. "Isn't that pretty thin evidence to shoot a man by if you're not sure?" "Right," O'Brien broke in. "But you notice that the Admiral said the antennae were the only difference noticeable to the eye. There's another, more important difference. The chemical makeup of the Zith body is such that water reacts violently on contact with it, producing what corresponds to severe burns, usually resulting in death. The Admiral and I both noticed Sanderson's nervous habit down in the gun bank a while ago. The pitcher incident a few minutes ago proved to us that Sanderson was not a Terran. You men noticed how he shook and paled when the water splashed near him?" "Then this isn't Sanderson at all?" McDaniels asked, his dark eyes wide with wonder. "Our records indicate that a Lieutenant Vern Sanderson left Aldebaran 2 about 3 months ago to assist on the Albion shakedown cruise. My guess is that the real Sanderson met with foul play somewhere along the way, and this thing was substituted. The League knew that war was coming. They also knew that the Federation has lately installed the new Dire gun and is in the process of installing the Bergeson hyperdrive in its capital ships. This critter was probably one of many sent to get these secrets. With them, victory for the League would be assured." "But why kill him? Why didn't he take him prisoner and find out what he knew?" "For just one damned good reason," Harrigan answered. "These boys are telepathic over short distances. The antennae has something to do with that. If I hadn't taken him by complete surprise, he would have notified his pals, if any, on this ship. And if there should happen to be 12 or 100 of these babies on board, We really would be in for it. O'Brien, arranged a watch on the mess hall. Have all hands who do not take water with their meals reported. You and Chief Scott will have to call them in one at a time and give them the acid test." O'Brien went off to arrange the mess hall watch, and Harrigan sat down, heaving a great sigh behind his desk. "Well, gentlemen," he said, "you have seen the enemy, or at least half the enemy." "Yes, sir," Rose responded. "But what about the Xantus, sir? We've never seen one of them." The Admiral shuddered inwardly. "I hope you never do," he confessed. All the wretched memories of 2 galactic campaigns swept over him again. "A Xantu looks like nothing more nor less than a beer barrel on skids, with a cauliflower for a head, 8 independently focusing eyes, 1 for each of the tentacles that sprout from the middle of the chest. Get one of those monkeys behind a gun bank, and you'll swear you have a platoon facing you." Harrigan lit a cigarette, forked smoke from his nostrils. "The Xantus don't do too much of the actual fighting, though. Back in the early days of space conquest, they teamed up with the Ziths. I imagine because the Xantus have a terrific technical culture, but are few in number, relatively speaking, and the Ziths aren't great on technology, but have the manpower. And, too, their home systems are only a few light years apart. So far, the partnership has worked out very well for the Dark Nebula League, the Xanthus providing the brains, and the Ziths the muscle. They are both ancient races, and very probably their plans for the conquest of this end of the universe would have gone nicely if they hadn't run up against the Solar Federation, led by Terra. We stand smack across their path. It has come to the point now where it's us or them. Absolutely." After the Sanderson episode was settled, Harrigan suddenly felt drained and exhausted, and retired to his quarters. While he slept, O'Brien, Chief Scott, and his men rounded up 4 more Zith spies who were immediately executed and unceremoniously dumped into the rocket chambers. On the double check, a 5th was discovered cowering in the captain's lifeboat, and he soon followed his brothers. The great ship ploughed through the ink of space, and the only sounds were the muffled throbbing from the rocket banks, the steady hum of the chronometer, and the clicking of the audio relay. At 0500 hours, the alarm gong clanged raucously. Harrigan was struggling into his trousers as O'Brien stuck his head in the door and shouted, "Jack, they've cut us off!" The captain explained the situation hurriedly as they sprinted toward the bridge. "Port watch just spotted 'em. 3 o'clock, low in an arc. There's only 7 of them, but apparently they've taken Polaris Base and cut us off from Sector 1. A series of muffled thuds was heard, and suddenly a succession of electric, blue-white flashes from outside the ports turned the dimness of the passageway into intense, eye-straining brilliance. "Hot hell, we must have got us one," Harrigan roared, and the 2 men broke into a run. In the powerful bridge screens, they could see the great cloud of smoke hanging in the void where the League ship had been hit, and, coming through it, several more of the grim pursuers. Occasionally, a beam of ripping, ravaging energy would lick out towards the Albion, but the slim fingers of death fell shorter of their goal by the minute. "Well," Mike breathed in relief, "we can outrun them. But what now?" "Better set a course for Antares 4, Harrigan advised. "The maintenance depot there can install the hyperdrive in a few days, and we can make it back to Terra then, regardless of what the League holds." As soon as the Albion was safely out of range of the League ships, the 2 officers were joined on the bridge by Master Gunner Cliff Irvington. They discussed the narrow squeak for a few minutes. At length Irvington punched out his cigar and confessed, "I could stand a drink." 10 minutes later, they were seated in Harrigan's Spartan quarters over a bottle of good Terran Irish whiskey and a flagon of Jovian Blongar. Irvington downed a heroic shot of the Jovian mixture, shivered, howled, and grabbed for the pitcher of water which the orderly had placed on the small table.
"Of all the chicken drinkers," O'Brien chaffed. "One little swig and is halfway under the table. Watch this, son, and learn from master of the art." Whereupon the captain poured a water glass full of the volatile brew and swallowed it without batting an eye. "Nuts," Cliff grunted. "I have to stay off the stuff for months at a time. You birds on the bridge can swill from one side of the galaxy to the other, but I've got to watch my nerves. And how about that night in Venusport when I had you two guys reeling, the night before we got our commissions?" Harrigan stifled a belch. Only an idiot would drink that ook and stay on his pins. "What was it now?" "Oh yes, Thunderbolt cocktail. 2 parts Terran vodka, 1 part Irish whiskey, gin, 3 raw eggs, nutmeg, and a jolt of Martian Phaley. Cosmos. They say it made good rocket fuel in a pinch." O'Brien sat up, glass in hand. "Why don't we mix a batch right now?" "Don't see why not." Harrigan flipped the audio switch. "Stores. Hansen, send a man up with Formula 13, will you?" When the supplies arrived a few minutes later, the 3 men indulged in an orgy of mixing and much testing, and, when the contents of the huge bowl met their rigid specifications, sat around it and reminisced about the early days in the Force. The 3 might easily have personified the Solar Federation Space Force. Harrigan, the organizer par excellence, tall, lean, and tanned by the radiation of 1,000 suns. O'Brien, the Admiral's lifelong friend, squat and muscular, the fatherly but deadly Irishman who had hated the League with all his powerful heart since the day, dim in time but not in memory, that the Xantus had murdered his parents on Sirius III in the first campaign. And Irvington, one of the truly fabulous characters in the Federation. The man who could reputedly hit a black basketball at 3 million miles with an energy gun, who flunked out of pilot school and turned gunner, and who, annually, spent his leave mining in the solar asteroid belt and had become the richest man in the Force. These men led the Albion on its questionable course into the future. Human, and therefore prone to human failings, to be sure, but wise in the ways of space they were too, and aware of its terrible dangers. At long last, when the ship's clock stood at 1100 hours, the party broke up. Ashtrays were piled high, the magnificent punch bowl was empty. Irvington and O'Brien left together, and Harrigan collapsed on his bunk. In his dreams he roamed the narrow streets of Mars Center, watched the pale, reed-like dancing girls sway their sensuous bodies before the open-mouthed Federation cadets, and heard the far-off, haunting desert music. He walked through the fairy cities of Zithobar, where the fragile, ethereal architecture belied the sadistic temperament of the inhabitants, and he cruised the tainted stratosphere of the Xantu planet, that dark and sinister world where peoples enjoyed nothing more than heaving Terran prisoners, one by one, into the mouths of roaring volcanoes. Anaton, the Federation base on Antares IV, was 6 days at full blast without hyperdrive. After the round of hectic activity surrounding their escape from Sector 1, officers and crew alike found the uneventful trip restful but boring. O'Brien played endless games of solitaire, Irvington slept, and Harrigan planned. Anaton was the biggest Federation base in Sector 2, and the hyperdrive was there. He just hoped that the base itself was there yet. At 0300 hours on the 6th day, Antares shone like a red eye, and they were 3 hours out of base. Antares 3 swung slowly past, and Harrigan alerted the crew. They didn't have long to wait. O'Brien had just stacked his cards away when the starboard watch howled, and 3 Xantu ships screamed across the Albion bow, almost on collision course. Harrigan's brow wrinkled as the tail ship dropped back to engage the Albion, and the other 2 fled. These were not the usual Xantu tactics. Irvington coolly got the black craft between his sights. There was a whoosh and a blinding blast, and 4 billion square miles of space flashed into daylight. The Albion quickly overtook the 2 remaining ships, and gunbanks 3, 4, and 5 riddled one of them. It slowed, spun, and became a lifeless drifting shell. But the pilot of Ship 3 was no fool. He suddenly swiveled his ship, boomed off at a tangent, and, as the Albion whipped by, his gunner caught her full in the tubes with a full charge from the stern guns. Now it was the Albion's turn to spin end for end. But as the Xantu craft spun into his sights for a fraction of a second, Irvington tripped the atomic cannon again. The bolt ricocheted off the Xantu's bow, and the ship slowly split down the center like an overripe melon. From the bridge, Harrigan counted 3 lifeboats deserting the mother ship, and he watched the gunners vainly try to pick them off. But they were too small a target, and they were quickly merged into the sanctuary of darkness. He buzzed O'Brien. "Let's get down to drive, quick. They've got that Xantu blast dead center." The drive section was a shambles. Men in weird asbestos suits and masks staggered through the smoke and fumes with the broken bodies of the rocket crew that had been caught in the explosion. Harrigan brushed at the angry tears as they carried Joe Merrick, the officer in charge, past them and laid the charred body beside the others. Merrick had been with him through both campaigns, and now the bitterness within Harrigan turned to grim resolution. At length, 37 men were counted out of action permanently. The Admiral turned solemnly away. "Think we'd better set her down on 3? O'Brien asked quietly. "Guess so, Mike. We can take her down on antigrav and maneuver with the bow jets." And then, slowly, "This puts us out of the war. You realize that?" "Yeah. And we can't even holler for help, or they'll swarm in on us like a pack of harpies." "I don't know about that, Mike. Those boats that got away will probably alert other elements of the League fleet as to our location. It's only a matter of time anyway, so we might as well break radio silence and try to get some Federation ships here first. It'll be a race, but it's the only chance we've got." Radio room sent the SOS and rang back the bridge almost immediately. "Message away, sir, but our receiver was knocked out by the blast. We get no acknowledgement on SOS." "Oh, great," Harrigan groaned. "That's all we needed." "Maybe we could make Anaton on the bow jets," O'Brien offered. "Doubtful. Besides, we don't want to chance being caught in space with the Albion in this shape. If my guess is any good, those 3 ships were part of a fleet which has just attacked Anaton, and by now the base is probably a smoking hole in the ground. No point in going to something like that." It took superhuman maneuvering and quite a bit of luck, but at last the scarred battleship came to rest, in partial hiding, at the foot of a cliff wall on the rugged, boulder-strewn surface of Antares III. Space Directory termed the planet Earth-type, diameter 9,300, atmosphere breathable for Terrans for a period of not to exceed 12 hours. Harrigan had the portable Dyer guns arranged in a semicircle at advantageous spots behind boulders up to 1 mile from the Albion, in case the survivors of the League ships might set their boats down nearby and attempt a coup over land. The Albion's own boats carried out patrols in the hope of locating the enemy before the enemy located them. For 16 hours after the landing, everything was absolutely quiet. And then, as relief gun crews slogged out the main hatch to take their positions at the portables, all hell broke loose. A short-range explosive rocket shell arched perfectly into the hatch and exploded with a deafening roar, scattering the relief crews like tenpins and slamming the 2-ton hatch cover clean off its swivel pins. The 3 League boats, with devastating surprise, zoomed in low and fast over the outlying gun positions, spraying a trail of Reezy powder which was ignited by their rockets. The countryside went up in a swirl and a flash. Another explosive rocket struck the Albion amidships before the crews got the more cumbersome fixed guns into firing position. The lightning-fast boats were too small and swift to be speared by anything save a lucky shot. Back and forth they raked the almost helpless battleship. The attack waned momentarily as one of the black boats was caught and instantly charred by crossfire from the Albion 1 and 4 banks. The remaining 2 changed tactics, roaring in over the big ship, past the top of the cliff, only to spin back, hit and run. 5 of the Albion patrol boats skittered home only to be caught in the fray and immediately knocked down. 3 more met the same fate, and a 4th was dodging desperately for its life when Harrigan's eyes popped wide open with amazement. A pencil-like silver destroyer escort, bearing the insignia of the Federation forces, fell on the League boats from zenith position and in a screaming, twisting dive blasted one and rammed the other into flying rubbish. The silver ship climbed a few miles vertically to see if the field had been properly cleared, flashed down, and dusted to a stop beside the Albion. Harrigan stepped over the smoking bodies in the main hatchway and dropped to the ground. O'Brien sprinted to join him, but before they could reach the other ship, an officer leaped from a belly lock and walked briskly towards them. He snapped a salute. "Admiral Harrigan and the Albion?" he asked. "Right, Lieutenant," Harrigan smiled wearily. "You're very welcome." "Lieutenant Sanderson, sir. 3rd Fleet attack arm. I was supposed—" "Sanderson?" O'Brien roared. "Yes, sir. I was assigned to the Albion, sir, but it took me 10 weeks to walk halfway around Pluto from where the Ziths dumped me and catch a ship to Terra Base. I take it they dubbed one of their beasties in for me." "They sure did," Harrigan answered. "But there wasn't much harm done. I killed you on the bridge, Lieutenant." "Oh?" Sanderson looked puzzled for a brief moment, then smiled. "Oh, that's good." "What's the score now?" O'Brien asked. "Well, sir, the 3rd attack fleet is standing off Anton now. You have probably guessed that part of a League fleet attacked the base. We picked up a few survivors, but damned few. Then we picked up a weak distress signal from this area, and Admiral Brands had us check on it." "Good thing he did," Harrigan admitted. "And now, Lieutenant, if you will be so good as to radio for a tub to pick us up, I will be most happy to leave this planet." "Yes, sir, at once." Sanderson saluted and ran for his ship. 3 hours and a few odd minutes later, the transport tub Avalon settled its ponderous bulk beside the Albion, and the slow transfer of the living and the dead began. 155 bodies were slated for burial on Terra. Another 60 were missing, whiffed into gas by League guns. Harrigan sank deeper into gloom as he removed the ship's log and helped O'Brien check the men off the Albion. At last the loading was completed. The Avalon hung for a moment on its antigravs, and Harrigan and Commander Johnson, in charge of the tub, looked down on the battered remains of the great craft. "Better come to the bridge and sit," Johnson said softly. On the bridge he poured Harrigan a stiff drink and cautioned, "Swallow that and get ready." Harrigan complied, puzzled. No sooner had he placed his glass on the table than a small but virile mule kicked him in the stomach. "Suffering? What was that?" he gasped. Johnson smiled. "Hyperdrive. Apparently Tech hasn't got the bugs worked out yet, but it's good enough for me. Only 4 hours to Terra." "Well, well," Harrigan mused. He rose and looked at the swirling greyness outside the ports. "Same deal on the other end?" "Yeah, a little wrench in the gut, but you get used to it." Harrigan said, "Well, well," again, and sat down. "Admiral," Johnson hesitated, "no offence now, you understand, but I have been wondering what the Albion was doing way out here on Antares 3. I understood that you were coming into Terra from the other side of Sector 1 when the fracas started." "We were, but when the League took Polaris Base and cut us off, we had to—" "Took Polaris Base?" The League didn't take Polaris Base. They had a dozen or so cruisers in that area, but they didn't tackle the base, didn't even make a pass at it. Harrigan slowly dropped his head into his hands. "Oh, my God," he moaned. "And I lost 200 men on a bad guess. I deserve to be broken to a spaceman third class for this." He jumped up and paced the bridge. "Great guns, what a fool I am. Polaris intact, and I risk a shipload of green men on a bad guess. This washes me up in the Force, that's for damn sure." "Oh, I don't think so, Admiral," Johnson smiled. "In fact, I think that—" "I don't give a damn what you think, Commander. The Force is no place for fools. I'm done." And Harrigan slammed off the bridge toward his quarters. Johnson smiled faintly and poured himself a drink. It was a tired and bedraggled Admiral who stepped off the Avalon 4 hours later into the sunlit bustle of Terra Base 1. He felt pride well up in him at the sight of the powerful base, the battle wagons and cruisers and squat tubs, some with their guts spread on the steel docks, waiting for their drive installation. Crane winches clanked and howled, welding torches flashed, and many-wheeled trailers sped about with ponderous equipment. But the activity was not frantic. It was efficient and orderly. He turned for a word with O'Brien, who was now puffing down the gangway, when a bright young spaceman first stepped up and saluted with a grin. "Admiral Garrison's regards to Admiral Harrigan and Captain O'Brien, and would they report to HQ at once?" "Well, here it comes, Mike." "Guess so," Mike agreed gloomily. "Why are all these baboons so happy?" He indicated the clustered groups of spacemen who regarded them smilingly as they passed and talked excitedly among themselves. "Dunno. Maybe they like the thoughts of admirals and captains getting chewed down." They paused briefly outside the door marked, "Admiral Garrison, GG Port Admiral." O'Brien shrugged. "Here goes nothing." Inside, the tall, balding man behind the desk jumped to his feet with a grin. "Jack! Mike! Boy, you two guys certainly beat anything I ever saw. Talk about your heroes!" "Cut it, George," Harrigan growled. "You don't have to rub it in." "Rub what in? Great Caesar! Hasn't anyone told you yet? You guys won the war, that's all." "Yeah, on the seat of our pants at Ataris 3, O'Brien muttered. "But I'm telling you, damn it!" Garrison came around the desk and clapped them on the shoulders. "Those League ships you brought down were heading for home with a hyperdrive secret, and you stopped them." Slow and stunning realization dawned on the two officers. O'Brien gave a long, low whistle and sank in his chair. Harrigan broke into a slow grin. "What a deal!" Garrison rubbed his hands. "What a deal! You guys will get promotions out of this, or my name isn't George Garrett." "But what the hell happened?" Harrigan demanded. "Like this," Garrison explained. 3 League ships picked up spies just off Anaton. They had the hyperdrive papers. Then they threw a duodeck bomb into the base and hightailed. The Albion was the only Federation ship of any size left in commission in the area. You got them. Just before the last League ship went down, it beamed a message to Zithobar, which we intercepted. So the 3rd attack arm swung over quick to see what the trouble was. Then we got your SOS and went after you before the League could get back for a little of its well-known vengeance." "Now, what the devil?" Harrigan rubbed his chin, grinning. "Is the war over, then?" "Not altogether, but it's just a matter of mopping up now and fixing Zithobar and the Xantu planet once and for all. The 3rd and 7th attack arms are completely equipped with a drive, and the 2nd is just about ready to roll. Brother, are those babies surprised when we pop out of nowhere into the middle of their formations and burn them down before they can aim a gun. But if they had hooked into the drive secret, it would have been all day for the Federation." Garrison threw back his head and roared with laughter. "You birds! With a green crew!" He held his sides. With a tub full of greenies, you win the war. And by accident yet. Oh, Lordy! He sat down to catch his breath. Well, I'll be, Harrigan shook his head. Yeah, I'll be one too, O'Brien muttered.
The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. Dead World by Jack Douglas, originally published in Amazing Stories, May 1961. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Although the most recent star to die, RNAC 89778, in the distant Menelaus galaxy, common name Menelaus 12, had 8 inhabited planets. Only some 1,000 people of the 5th planet escaped and survived as a result of a computer error which miscalculated the exact time by 2 years. Due to basic psychophylo maladjustments, the refugees of Menelaus 12-5 are classified as antisocial types B6 and must be considered unstable. All antisocial types B6 are barred from responsible positions in United Galaxies by order of the Intergalactic Council. Short history of the United Galaxies. Juan Saltario started it. He was serving in my company, and he was one of them. A Menelaus 12-5, unstable. And don't ever call that damned little planet by its number if you meet one of them. They call it Nova Morania. But you won't meet one of them. Or maybe you will. Maybe they did make it. I like to think they did. There were a lot of them in the companies in 3078. Restless men. The companies were the logical place for them. We're still classified antisocial B6 too. Every year it's harder to get recruits, but we still have to be careful who we take in. We took Juan Saltario. There was something about him from the very start. Why do you want to join a free company? He was a short, humanoid type with deep black eyes and a thin, lipless mouth that never smiled. I'm an antisocial. I like to fight. I want to fight. A misfit joining the misfits. A grudge against the council. It's not good enough, mister. We live on the council. Try again. Saltario's black eyes stared without a flicker. You're Red Stone, commander of the Red Company. You hate the council, and I hate the council. You're the... Saltario stopped. I said, the traitor of the glorious war of survival. You can say it, Saltario. The lipless mouth was rigid. I don't think of it that way. I think of a man with personal integrity, Saltario said. I suppose I should have seen it then, the rock he carried deep inside him. It might have saved 30,000 good men. But I was thinking of myself, Commander Red Stone of the Red Company, Earthman. Only we're not all Earthmen now. Every year there are fewer recruits, but it won't be long before we die out, and the Council will have the last laugh. Old Red Stone, the traitor of the war of survival, the little finger on my left hand still missing, and telling the universe I was a very old soldier of the outlawed free companies hanging on to life on a rocky planet on the distant Salaman galaxy. Back at the old stand because United Galaxies still need us. In a way it's a big joke. 2 years after Rajai Ben and I had a bellyful of the glorious war of survival, and they chased us all the way out here.
They turned right around and made the peace. A joke on me. But sometimes I like to think that our run-out was the thing that made them think and made peace. When you've been a soldier for 35 years, you like to win battles, but you like to feel you helped bring peace too. I said, "Personal integrity? That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So you like personal integrity? All right, Soltario, are you sure you know what you're getting into? We're 60 million light-years from Galaxy Center, 10 million from the nearest United Galaxy city. We've got no comforts, no future, nothing to do but fight. A woman in her right mind won't look at us. If they see you in uniform, they'll spit on you. If they catch you out of uniform, they'll kill you." Soltario shrugged. "I like to eat. I've got nowhere to go. All I've got is myself, and a big piece of ice I called home." I nodded. "Okay, we fight small wars for good profits. It's not Earth out there, but we've got 4 nice suns, plenty of Lucanian whiskey Rajah Ben taught the locals to make, and we're our own masters. The United Galaxies leaves us pretty much alone unless they need us. You do your job, and your job is what I tell you to do, period. You got that straight?" Soltario very nearly smiled. "It sounds good to me, sir." "I hope it'll sound good in a year, Soltario, because once you're in, you don't get out, except feet first. Is that clear? I have life and death rights over you. You owe allegiance to the Red Company and me, and to no one else. Got that? Today your best friends are the men of Rajah Ben's Lucanian 4th Free Patrol, and your worst enemies are the men of Mandasiva's Syrian O Company. Tomorrow Rajah Ben's boys may be your worst enemies, and Mandasiva's troops your best friends. It all depends on the contract. A company on the same contract is a friend. A company against the contract is an enemy. You'll drink with a man today and kill him tomorrow. Got it? If you kill a free companion without a contract, you go to court-martial. If you kill a citizen of the United Galaxies except in a battle under contract, I throw you to the wolves, and that means you're finished. That's the way it is." "Yes, sir." Soltario never moved a muscle. He was rigid. "Right," I said. "Get your gear, see the adjutant, and sign the agreement. I think you'll do." Soltario left. I sat back in my chair and thought about how many non-Earthmen I was taking into the company. Maybe I should have been thinking about this one single non-Earthman and the something he was carrying inside him. But I didn't, and it cost the companies 30,000 men we couldn't afford to lose. We can't afford to lose one man. There are only 100 companies now, 20,000 men each, give or take a few thousand, depending on how the last contract went. Life is good in the United Galaxies now that they've disarmed and outlawed all war again, and our breed is dying out faster than it did in the 500 years of peace before the War of Survival. Too many of the old companions like me went west in the War of Survival. The Galactic Council know they need us, know that you can't change all living creatures into good galactic citizens overnight, so they let us go on fighting for anyone in the universe who wants to take something from someone else, or who thinks someone else wants to take something from him. And even the mighty United Galaxies needs guards for expeditions to the unexplored galaxies. But they don't like us, and they don't want us. They don't cut off our little fingers anymore, but we have to wear our special black uniforms when we go into United territory, under penalty of a quick death. Humane, of course. They just put us to sleep gently and for keeps. and they've got a stockpile of ionic bombs ready at all times in case we get out of hand. We don't have ionic weapons. That's part of the agreement, and they watch us. They came close to using them down there in the frozen waste of Menelaus 12, but 30,000 of us died without ionics. We killed each other. They liked that, even if they didn't like what happened. Do you know what it means to be lost? Really lost? I'm lost, if that means I know I'll never go back to live on Earth. But I know that Earth is still there to go back to, and I can dream of going home. Juan Soltario and the other refugees have no home to go back to. They can't even dream. They sat in that one ship that escaped and watched their planet turn into a lifeless ball of ice that would circle dead and frozen forever around its burned-out star. A giant tomb that carried under its thick ice their homes and their fields and their loves, and they could not even hope and dream, or I did not think they could. Soltario had been with us a year when we got the contract to escort the survey mission to Nova Morania, a private Earth commercial mining firm looking for minerals under the frozen wastes of the dead planet. Rajai Ben was in on the contract. We took 2 battalions, one from my Red Company and one from Rajai Ben's Lucanian patrol. My sub-commander was Pete Colenso, old Mike Colenso's boy. It all went fine for a week or so, routine guard and patrol. The survey team wouldn't associate with us, of course, but we were used to that. We kept our eyes open and our mouths shut. That's our job, and we give value for money received. So we were alert and ready. But it wasn't the attack that nearly got us this time. It was the cold of the dead planet lost in absolute zero and absolute darkness. Nova Morania was nearly 40% uranium, and who could resist that? A Centaurian trading unit did not resist the lure. The attack was quick and hard, a typical Lucanian patrol attack. My company was pinned down at the first volley from those damned smoky blasters of the Lucanians. All I could see was the same shimmering lights I had learned to know so well in the War of Survival against Lucania. Some day maybe I'll find out how to see a Lucan. Rajai Ben has worked with me a long time to help, but when the attack came this time, all I could do was eat ice and beam a help call to Rajai Ben. That Centaurian trading unit was a cheap outfit. They had hired only 1 battalion of Rajai Ben's 9th Lucanian Free Patrol, and Rajai Ben flanked them right off that planet. I got my boys on their feet, and we chased Rajai's men halfway back to Salomon, with Rajai Ben laughing like a hyena the whole way. "Dip me in mud, Red Boy. I'd give a prime contract for 1 gander at old Rajai Ben's face. He's blowing a gasket." I said, "Nice flank job." Rajai Ben laughed so hard I could see his pattern of coloured light shaking like a dancing rainbow. "I took 2 sub-commanders. Wait till I hit that bullet head for ransom." Then we stopped laughing. We had won the battle, but Rajai Ben was a crafty old soldier, and his sabotage squad had wrecked our engines and our heating units. We were stuck on a frozen planet without heat. Young Colenso turned white. "What do we do?" I said, "Beam for help and pray we don't freeze first." They had missed our small communications reactor unit. We sent out our call, and we all huddled around the small reactor. There might be enough heat out of it to let us live 5 hours, if we were lucky. It was the 3rd hour when Juan Soltario began to talk. Maybe it was the nearness of death. I was 22, Portario was the leader on our planet. He found the error when we had one ship ready. We had 3 days. No time to get the other ships ready. He said we were lucky. The other planets didn't have even one ship ready. Not even time for United Galaxies to help. Portario chose 1,000 of us to go. I was one. At first I felt very good, you know. I was really happy. Until I found out that my wife couldn't go. Not fit enough. United Galaxies had beamed the standards to us. Funny how you don't think about other people until something hurts you. I'd been married a year. I told them it was both of us or neither of us. I told Portario to tell United Galaxies they couldn't break up a family and to hell with their standards. They laughed at me. Not Portario, the Council. What did they care? They would just take another man. My wife begged me to go. She cried so much I had to agree to go. I loved her too much to be able to stay and see the look on her face as we both died when she knew I could have gone. On the ship before we took off, I stood at a port and looked down at her. A small girl trying to smile at me. She waved once before they led her away from the rocket. All hell was shaking the planet already, had been for months, but all I saw was a small girl waving once, just once. She's still here, somewhere down there under the ice. The cold was slowly creeping into us. It was hard to move my mouth, but I said, "She loved you. She wanted you to live. Without her, without my home, I'm as dead as the planet. I feel frozen. She's like that dead sun out there, and I'll circle around her until someone gets me and ends it." Soltario seemed to be seeing something. "I'm beginning to forget what she looked like. I don't want to forget. I can't forget her on this planet. The way it was. It was a beautiful place, perfect. I don't want to forget her." Colenso said, "You won't have long to remember." But Colenso was wrong. My 3rd Battalion showed up when we had just less than an hour to live. They took us off. The Earth mining outfit haggled over the contract because the job had not been finished and I had to settle for 2/3 contract price. Rajai Ben did better when he ransomed Arjay Ben's 2 sub-commanders. It wasn't a bad deal, and I would have been satisfied, except that something had happened to Juan Soltario. Maybe it made him realize that he did not want to die after all. Or maybe it turned him space-happy, and he began to dream. A dream of his own, born up there in the cold of his dead planet. A dream that nearly cost me my company. I did not know what that dream was until Soltario came into my office a year later. He had a job for the company. "How many men?" I asked. "Our company and Rajai Ben's patrol," Soltario said. "Full strength?" "Yes, sir." "Price?" "Standard, sir," Soltario said. "The party will pay." "Just a trip to your old planet?" "That's all," Soltario said. "A guard contract. The hiring party just don't want any interference with their project." 2 full companies, 40,000 men. They must expect to need a lot of protecting. United Galaxies opposes the project, or they will if they get wind of it. I said, "United opposes a lot of things. What's special about this scheme?" Soltario hesitated, then looked at me with those flat black eyes. "Ionics." It's not a word you say or hear without a chill somewhere deep inside. Not even me, and I know a man can survive ionic weapons. I know, because I did once. Weapons so powerful, I'm one of the last men alive who saw them in action. Mathematically, the big ones could wipe out a galaxy. I saw a small one destroy a star in 10 seconds. I watched Soltario for a long time. It seemed a long time anyway. It was probably 20 seconds. I was wondering if he had gone space crazy for keeps, and I was thinking of how I could find out what it was all about in time to stop it. I said, 100 companies won't be enough, Soltario. Have you ever seen or heard what an ionic bomb can? Soltario said, not weapons, peaceful power. Even that's out and you know it, I said. United Galaxies won't even touch peaceful ionics, too dangerous to even use. You can take a look first. A good look, I said. I alerted Rajai Ben, and we took 2 squads and a small ship, and Soltario directed us to a tall mountain that jutted 100 feet above the ice of Nova Morania. I was not surprised. In a way, I think I knew from the moment Soltario walked into my office. Whatever it was, Soltario was part of it, and I had a pretty good idea what it was. The only question was, how? But I didn't have time to think it out any farther. In the companies, you learn to feel danger. The first fire caught 4 of my men. Then I was down on the ice. They were easy to see. Black uniforms with white wedges. Pete O'Hara's White Wedge Company, Earthmen. I don't like fighting other Earthmen, but a job's a job, and you don't ask questions in the companies. It looked like a full battalion against our 2 squads. On the smooth ice surface there was no cover except the jutting mountain top off to the right, and no light in the absolute darkness of a dead star. But we could see through our viewers, and so could they. They outnumbered us 10 to 1. Rajai Ben's voice came through the closed circuit. Bad show, Red. They got our pants down. You call it, I answered. Break silence. Surrender. When a company breaks silence in battle, it means surrender. There was no other way. And I had a pretty good idea that the Council itself was behind O'Hara on this job. If it was ionics involved, they wouldn't ransom us. The Council had waited a long time to catch Red Stone in an execution offence. They wouldn't miss. But 40 of our men were down already. Okay, I beamed over the circuit. Break silence. We've had it, Rajai. Council offence, Red? Yeah. Well, I'd had a lot of good years. Maybe I'd been a soldier too long. I was thinking just like that when the sudden flank attack started. From the right, heavy fire from the cover of the solitary mountain top. O'Hara's men were dropping. I stared through my viewer. On that mountain I counted the uniforms of 22 different companies. That was very wrong. Whoever Soltario was fronting for could not have the power or the gold to hire 24 companies, including mine and Rajai Ben's. And the fire was heavy, but not that heavy. But whoever they were very welcome. We had a chance now, and I was making my plans when the tall old man stood up on the small jutting top of that mountain. The tall old man stood up, and a translating machine boomed out. All of you, O'Hara's men, look at this. I saw it. In a beam of light on the top of that mountain, it looked like a small neutron source machine. But it wasn't. It was an ionic beam projector. The old man said, Go home." They went fast and silent, and I knew where they were going. Not to Salaman. O'Hara would have taken one look at that machine and be halfway to United Galaxy Center before he had stopped seeing it. I felt like taking that trip myself, but I had agreed to look, and I would look. If we were lucky, we would have 48 hours to look and run. I fell in what was left of my company behind the men that had saved us. More company uniforms than I had ever seen in one place. They said nothing. Just walked into a hole in that mountain, into a cave. And in the cave, at the far end, a door opened. An elevator. We followed the tall old man into the elevator, and it began to descend. The elevator car went down for a long time. At last I could see a faint glow far below. The glow grew brighter, and the car stopped. Far below the glow was still brighter. We all stepped out into a long corridor cut from solid rock. I estimated that we were at least 200 miles down, and the glow was hundreds of miles deeper. We went through 3 sealed doors and emerged into a vast room. A room bright with light and filled with more men in company uniforms, civilians, even women, at least 1,000. And I saw it, the 1,000 refugees, all of them, gathered from all the companies, from wherever they had been in the galaxies, gathered here in a room 200 miles into the heart of their dead planet, a room filled with giant machines, ionic machines, highly advanced ionic power reactors. The old man stood in front of his people and spoke. "I am Jason Portario. I thank you for coming." I broke in. "Ionic power is an execution offense. You know that. How the hell did you get all this?" "I know the offense, Commander," Portario said. "And I know you. You're a fair man. You're a brave man. It doesn't matter where we got the power. Many men are dead to get it. But we have it, and we will keep it. We have a job to do." I said, "After that stunt out there, you've about as much chance as a snowball in hell. O'Hara's halfway to Galaxy Center. Look, with a little luck we get you out to Salaman. If you leave all this equipment, I might be able to hide you until it blows over." The old man shrugged. "I would have preferred not to show our hand, but we had to save you. I was aware that the Council would find us out sooner or later. They missed the ionic material a month ago, but that is unimportant. The important matter is, will you take our job? All we need is another 2 days, perhaps 3. Can you hold off an attack for that long?" "Why?" I asked. Portario smiled. "All right, Commander. You should know all we plan. Sit down and let me finish before you speak." I sat. Rajai Ben sat. The agitation of his coloured lights showed that he was as disturbed as I was. The 1,000 Nova Moranians stood there in the room and watched us. Yuan Soltario stood with his friends. I could feel his eyes on me, hot eyes, as if something inside that lost man was burning again. Portario lighted a pipe. I had not seen a pipe since I was a child. The habit was classified as ancient usage in the United Galaxies. Portario saw me staring. He held his pipe and looked at it. "In a way, Commander," the old man said, "this pipe is my story. On Nova Morania we liked a pipe. We liked a lot of the old habits. Maybe we should have died with all the others. You know, I was the one who found the error. Sometimes I'm not at all sure my friends here thank me for it. Our planet is dead, Commander, and so are we. We're dead inside. But we have a dream. We want to live again. And to live again, our planet must live again. The old man paused, as if trying to be sure of telling it right. We mean no harm to anyone. All we want is our life back. We don't want to live forever like lumps of ice circling around a dead heart. What we plan may kill us all, but we feel it is worth the risk. We have thousands of ionic power reactors. We have blasted out Venturi tubes. We found life still deep in the center of this planet. It is all ready now. With all the power we have, we will break the hold of our dead sun and send this planet off into space. I said, "You're insane. It can't." "But it can, Commander. It's a great risk, yes, but it can be done. My calculations are perfect. We want to leave this dead system, go off into space, and find a new star that will bring life back to our planet. A green, live, warm Nova Morania once again." Rajai Ben was laughing. "That's the craziest damn dream I ever sat still for. You know what your chances of being picked up by another star are? Picked up just right. Why?" Portario said, "We have calculated the exact initial thrust, the exact tangential velocity, the precise orbital path we need. If all goes exactly, I emphasize exactly to the last detail as we have planned it, we can do it. Our chances of being caught by the correct star in the absolutely correct position are 1 in 1,000 trillion, but we can do it." It was so impossible, I began to believe he was right. "If you aren't caught just right?" Portario's black eyes watched me. "We could burn up or stay frozen and lifeless. We could drift in space forever, as cold and dead as we are now, and our ionic power won't last forever. The forces we will use could blow the planet apart, but we are going to try. We would rather die than live as walking dead men in this perfect united galaxies we do not want." The silence in the room was like a Salaman fog. Thick silence, broken only by the steady hum of the machines deep beneath us in the dead planet. A wild, impossible dream of 1,000 lost souls. A dream that would destroy them, and they did not care. There was something about it all that I liked. I said, "Why not get council approval?" Portario smiled. "Council has little liking for wild dreams, Commander. It would not be considered as advancing the future of United Galaxy's destiny. Then there are the ionics." And Portario hesitated. "And there is the danger of imbalance, galactic imbalance. I have calculated carefully. The danger is remote, but Council is not going to take even a remote chance." Yuan Soltario broke in. "All they care about is their damned sterile destiny. They don't care about people. Well, we do. We care about something to live for. The hell with the destiny of the galaxies. They don't know, and we'll be gone before they do know." "They know plenty now. O'Hara's beamed them in." "So we must hurry," Portario said. 3 days, Commander. Will you protect us for 3 days? a council offense punishable by instant destruction with United Galaxies reserve ionic weapons in the hands of the super-secret police and disaster teams. And 3 days is a long time. I would be risking my whole company. I heard Rajai Ben laugh. "Blast me, Red, it's so damn crazy I'm for it. Let's give it a shot." I did not know then how much it would really cost us. If I had, I might not have agreed. Or maybe I would have. It was good to know people could still have such dreams in our computer age. "Okay," I said. "Beam the full companies and try to get one more. Mandasiva's Syrian boys would be good. We'll split the fee 3 ways. Juan Soltario said, "Thanks, Red." I said, "Thank me later, if we're still around." We beamed the companies, and in 20 minutes they were on their way, straight into the biggest trouble we had had since the War of Survival. I expected trouble, but I didn't know how much. Pete Colenso tipped me off. Pete spoke across the light years on our beam. "Mandasiva says okay if we guarantee the payment. I've deposited the bond with him and we're on our way. But, Red, something's funny." "What?" "This place is empty. The whole damn galaxy out here is like a desert. Every company has moved out somewhere." "Okay," I beamed. "Get rolling fast." There was only one client who could hire all the companies at one time. United Galaxies itself. We were in for it. I had expected perhaps 10 companies, not 3 against 97, give or take a few out on other jobs. It gave me a chill. Not the odds, but if Council was that worried, maybe there was bad danger. But I'd given my word, and a companion keeps his word. We had one ace in the hole, a small one. If the other companies were not here in Menelaus yet, they must have rendezvoused at Galaxy Center. It was the kind of follow-the-book mistake United would make. It gave us a day and a half. We would need it. They came at dawn on the 2nd day. We were deployed across 5 of the dead planets of Menelaus 12 in a ring around Nova Morania. They came fast and hard, and Portario and his men had at least 10 hours' work left before they could fire their reactors and pray. Until then, we did the praying. It didn't help. Mandasiva's command ship went at the 3rd hour. A Lucan blaster got it. By the 4th hour I had watched 3 of my sub-command ships go. A Syrian force beam got one, an Earth fusion gun got another, and the 3rd went out of action and rammed O'Hara's command ship that had been leading their attack against us. That 3rd ship of mine was Pete Colenso's. Old Mike would have been proud of his boy. I was sick. Pete had been a good boy. So had O'Hara. Not a boy, O'Hara, but the next to the last of old free companion from Earth. I'm the last, and I said a silent goodbye to O'Hara. By the 6th hour, Rajai Ben had only 10 ships left. I had 12. 5,000 of my men were gone. 8,000 of Rajai Ben's Lucans. The Syrians of Mandasiva's O Company were getting the worst of it, and in the 8th hour Mandasiva's second-in-command surrendered. It would be over soon, too soon, and the dream would be over with the battle. I broke silence. "Red Stone calling. Do you read me? Commander Stone calling. Request conference. Repeat. Request conference." A face appeared on the intercompany beam screen. The cold, blank, hard-bitten face of the only free company commander senior to me now that O'Hara was gone. Jake Campesino of the Cygne Black Company. "Are you surrendering, Stone?" "No. I want to speak to my fellow companions." Campesino's voice was like ice. "Violation! You know the rules, Stone. Silence cannot be broken in battle. I will bring charges. You're through, Stone." I said, "Okay, crucify me later, but hear me now." Campesino said, "Close silence or surrender." It was no good. We'd had it, and across the distance of battle Rajai Ben's face appeared on the screen. The coloured lights that were Alukin's face, and I knew enough to know that the shimmering lights were mad. "The hell with them, Red! Let's go all the damned way!" And a new face appeared on the screen. A face I knew too well. First Councillor Rourke. "Stone, you've done a lot in your day, but this is the end, you hear me? You're defending a madman in a council crime. Do you realize the risk? Universal imbalance. The whole pattern of galaxies could be destroyed. We'll destroy you for this, Stone. An ionic project without council authorization." I said to Campesino, 5 minutes, Commander. That's all." There was a long blank on the screen. Then Campesino's cold face appeared. "Okay, Red, talk. I don't like civilian threats. You've got your 5 minutes. Make it good." I made it good. I told them of a handful of people who had a dream, a handful of people who wanted their home back, a few lost souls who would rather die trying to live the way they wanted to live than go on living in a world they did not want. And I told them of the great united galaxies that had been created to protect the dreams of everyone in it, and had forgotten why it had been created. I told them that it did not matter who was right or wrong, because when a man can no longer dream, something has gone wrong in the universe. When I finished, Campesino's face was impassive. Campesino said, "You heard Commander Stone, men. Close off, Stone. Give me a minute to get the vote." I waited. It was the longest minute of my life. "You win, Red," Campesino said. He was smiling at me. "Go home, Councillor. Battle's over." The Councillor went. He said there would be hell to pay, and maybe there will be. But I don't think so. They still need us. We lost 30,000 good men in all the companies. But when the next dawn came, Nova Morania was gone. I don't know where they went or what happened to them. Here in my stronghold, I sometimes imagine them safe and rebuilding a green world where they can smoke pipes and live their own lives. And sometimes I imagine them all dead and drifting out there in the infinity of space. I don't think they would mind too much either way.
The end. Do you want to know how you can help save more of the forgotten stories of futures past? Visit storiesoffuturespast.substack.com/about.